like humans done fucked up.
Which is an excellent trope.
Yeah. What does Smaug say when he's got nothing to do?
I don't know.
Smorgasbord. What is trope?
What is tropes?
How do book?
How do book? Why do tropes?
Why do tropes?
Activate your energy.
Welcome to the Activated Authors Podcast, a show where we distill the core principles of what it takes to become a happy, healthy, and productive author, no matter what stage of the journey you're at. I'm your host, Daniel Willcocks. I'm an international best-selling author, as well as an author coach, speaker, and creative entrepreneur. But most importantly, I'm a lifelong student of all things productivity, psychology, and human behaviour. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Without further ado, let's dive in.
What is up, activators, and welcome back to another episode of the Activated Authors, I guess, podcast.
My name is for me to jump in for a second.
No. I thought I'd try and be funny. Sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
My name is Daniel Willcocks, and here with me every single week is the one and only
Samantha Frost. That's me. Hello.
Hello, Samantha Frost. Ah, damn it, Samantha Sost. There we go.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I was 7, I went by Samantha Pimion for a while.
Pimion?
Yeah, I wrote a load of letters down on a piece of paper, asked my dad what it said, and he said it says Pimion. And I was like, I am now and forevermore Samantha Pimion.
Samantha Pimion. I think I've told this anecdote before, but like when looking at author, like starting my author business and possible pen names and stuff, I was going to use a pseudonym that was the second name of it'll be my grandmother's maiden name, which is also a cock-based surname. So it was going to be a Hancock rather than a Willcocks, but ultimately I think I just went with the name. It was just easier. How are you, Sam? How's your week been?
My week has been a bit of a mixed bag, mostly good, but it started off with a major triggering, which just saw me like up all night kind of scrubbing skirting boards and stuff. But apart from that, generally speaking, I've had a lovely week, actually. Thank you very much. I've been spending some lovely quality time with my son, and playing chess and hearing all about new and interesting ideas from his brain.
Lovely. Yes, we won't share the one that was in this.
No, we won't. It's unnecessary. It's unnecessary.
If you want to find that out, you need to come to the sprints, guys.
Yeah.
You're missing out on a lot, trust me.
It's just like, there's certain times in a parent's life where your kid says something and you're just so fucking grateful that you're inside.
Yeah.
How about you? How's your week been?
Quick.
Yeah
We're recording this Thursday afternoon, 19th of January 2023 at approximately 1:56, and it's just kind of flown by. Like, it's one of those I'm loath to say weird weeks. It's just one of those weeks that, like, I'm aware that a lot has happened. I've done a lot, but I'm struggling now to remember on the spot what it was.
Yes.
So yeah, I've been working through actually sticking with a to-do list. And I always find that with myself, like, I end up making big, complicated to-do lists on things like Notion and looking into all of that, and then struggling to get with it.
Mm-hmm.
I've got I think it's just called Notes on my Mac, and I've got like a tab in there, and I just at the minute throwing stuff out there, rearranging stuff, working through bits and pieces, and it's been good. Like I feel like I've been doing this for ages, but it's a lot of like groundwork for some of the activated author stuff. So I've been booking coming masterclasses. We've got the guys from Plotter coming to give us a masterclass on Monday. I've got a couple more that I'm just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, so I won't say what they are. But then I've also got, working on the first full interview season of this podcast.
Yep.
One thing that I haven't really mentioned on this podcast is I've got another podcast starting soon, which is part of kind of the stuff that I'm doing over at Writers of Horror. So we're starting a podcast in which we interview horror authors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been deliberately designed in a way that it won't use all of our time. It won't be as sapping, because weekly podcasts like this, they take effort, and I can't really commit to more than one of these a week. It's just too much. Yeah. Whereas with the Writers of Horror, it's myself splitting the work with the wonderful Julie Heiner. Mm-hmm. She's fantastic at interviewing people. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun seeing her get people into the hot seat. But we're doing one episode a month, so like it's slow going, but it's been deliberately built in a way that we can sustain it and get it started and not like overdo it, just because we're doing it's a passion project, but also we want to speak to people in the horror community and spread their message. So yeah, it's been a good week. It's been a quick week, and we're almost up to the weekend already. So that's what I've got.
Yeah.
What's your key takeaway from this week?
So I did a thing this week, which I'm usually not wont to do, which is the reflecting page of my diary. So if you remember a few episodes back, I spoke about how like they're usually always blank, and I find like reflecting, but I deliberately sat down this week. So the planner that I've got is a Clever Fox planner, and in the like reflection pages it has I don't know what they're called. It's very similar idea to what you've done in the author matrix, which is where you kind of like give a score to areas of your life. This is slightly more arbitrary, I think, because it's just kind of like a circle with the lines, and it's like a 1 to 10, and you just kind of like over the last week guess where do you think, as opposed to like, you know, like a proper deep dive. And it was the saddest circle I've ever seen in my life. No. It had like two, so if you imagine almost like a pie chart, and like equal wedges, it had 2 of the wedges almost completely full, and the rest just hovering around 1 and 2. And I was like, oh no. And so I looked at that and I was like, okay, these are the things that I really want to focus on this week. And then it kind of slipped my mind because, again, my brain. And then at the end of Monday, I was like, shit. And I had that instant knee-jerk response of, well, I'm going to have to wait a week. Like, I've started the week now, so like, I guess we'll... And I was like, I was kind of walking down the stairs. I literally stopped on step and was like, no. Like, you do not have to wait until Monday to start. And I literally every day since then, I've been writing that as my little affirmation, because I write an affirmation every day when I'm planning my day out. Just to remind myself of that, like, you don't have to wait till the next day. You don't have to wait till Monday. You don't have to wait till the beginning of a month, the beginning of a quarter, or the beginning of a year. You can stop or start anything at any time. Time is arbitrary. We make these rules for ourselves. Yeah. And so it was just a long-winded explanation there of explaining that, yes, it was one of those lessons that I kind of preach. And like, I almost fell right down in that bloody well myself. So that is my takeaway, is that you do not have to wait till Monday to start. And also, if you like have forgotten something, or you like, and I say this in inverted quotes, mess up on something halfway through the day, that does not mean the day is ruined. You just say, okay, well, I'm human, that's fine, dust yourself off and carry on.
Yeah.
There you go. That's my takeaway. Please tell me, Mr. Willcocks, what is yours?
Well, it's such an important point there. Like, you don't have to wait till Monday, because the amount of times I've gotten to the beginning of December and I'm like, I'll wait until the 1st of January before I start doing it. It's like, why? Like, if you want these things enough, because clearly there's a reason you're telling yourself that you want to do them, why not start at the point where you're like, I'm going to start this, or like at the most, like, I'll start this in the morning.
Right?
Like, it is a bizarre mental sort of cage that we put ourselves in, that like, oh, like, I really want to do this, but it's Tuesday and it's on a Monday, and like you say, you weren't born on a Monday, so like the rhythm of your life isn't dictated by Mondays, or shouldn't be. Yeah. If you were born on a Monday, then start everything on a Monday. What are you doing? Just ignore everything I just said. God bless those Monday babies. I think I was a Thursday baby. Anyhow,
it was a Friday baby.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
My takeaway this week is a book that I'm currently reading, which is called Stolen Focus. And I can't remember who wrote it. It's on the front of the book.
Yep.
But it's like, I've read a book before, which is basically about the perils of social media and, you know, mobile phone usage, and how that steals your focus and things, and like how much more fast-paced the world is with digital technologies. Yes. And again, like, ironically, the name for the other book's escaping me, but it was the other book I read was basically an experiment of a guy who was like, I'm going to take a month off of social media, and chronicling that experience and kind of, building a legion behind him of other people that took on that challenge and were inspired by his efforts and all this kind of stuff. And this is a very similar thing in tone, but it focuses more on the focus and the attention side of things. So the whole story, from where I am so far, I'm about halfway through, the whole main line of thought is centered around mobile phones and the fact that he has taken this, I think it's 3 month detox in which they've gone to Provincetown without any technology, a laptop that only like works with Word and like a phone that is for emergencies. But within that, there's lots of interviews and anecdotes and sort of little stories about professionals from all over the world discovering this sort of absence, this hole that's appearing in our attention as human beings. And I won't go massively into it. Like, it is the good thing I've really enjoyed about it is very well written, so it's very readable, despite the fact there are quite lofty ideas in there. But it talks about the fact that like our attention as a species just in general is diminishing year on year and year and year, and it's not just because of mobile phones. It's happened over the last like 100-200 years because of how quickly everything's evolved, because of industrialization, because of all that. Like the world just moves faster, and with that means that obviously our attentions go faster. And I find it in myself, like I used to be able to happily sit down and just read like an 800-page fantasy novel, and now I'm like, I need to read this novella because it's quick. And even then I'll like,
interesting.
It's bizarre. And like TV shows and stuff, like the idea of sitting down and watching something for an hour is much less intimidating than sitting down and watching 5 episodes of a 20-minute show. So it's interesting reading a lot of that, and it's highlighting a lot of my own behaviors. And I said to you earlier this week, like I'm under no illusion that I'm currently like very, very addicted to my phone, which is an issue and something that I'm looking into. But like it's a hard world where everything centers around digital. So like I've tried it before, or the last time I did a proper social media detox, I was off it for I think about 3 weeks, and I only used it for phone calls and for music, and stayed off it. It was wonderful. And this was about 6-7 years ago, and then was pulled back into it because my job was in digital marketing, so I needed the phone. But then any other time I've tried to come off it recently, like my bank's on there, my contacts are on there, like it's got a camera to it. Like the camera is one of the biggest things that gets me, because I love like recording moments with Bailey. The minute I'm like, I'll lock my phone away, I'm like, well then I know I can, cast these in memory, but sometimes it's nice to have a picture. And
yeah, it is, especially with a kid, especially with a young kid, because they grow so quickly. And like the Bailey that you will have in front of you today is a different child to the Bailey you had in front of you 2 years ago, will be a different child to the Bailey you have in front of you 2 years in the future. Like they grow and change so quickly. And I think it's a real difficult one when it comes to mobile phones, because we are, I think, just as a species generally, particularly in the Western world, addicted to our phones. Like they are built to make you an addict. For those listening, Dan is currently doing a little jig and pointing to empty spaces in the room where if it was a reel or a TikTok, there would be text appearing to make a point that he doesn't therefore have to say, but instead does a little shifty dance. It is tricky, especially when you are like a business owner and you're using your phone for business things, and you want to go onto social media to promote things and to engage and to connect with other people in a similar situation. I think it is a tricky one.
Yeah, it's a real point of contention as well, because I'm very aware of the detrimental effects of social media, but then in order to reach people, I need to actively play into the system. And it's one of those things where, and this could go into a whole discussion, I think we probably will do an episode on this at some point. But it's a real thing at the minute with AI with me, in the sense of like, there are certain things that you could rebel against, or you could find a way to utilize the system in a positive way. I think that's kind of the realization I've come to, is like, by ignoring digital promotion, social media, all those kind of platforms, the only person that's really damaging livelihood wise is myself. So how can I use the platform in a way that works with me, that I can manage, that also sends the right messages and brings people our area of the internet? So yeah, all that to say, Stolen Focus, very good book so far, so I'll hopefully have this finished this week.
And just very, 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 very quickly, rebelling against the system is still partaking in the system.
Mhm.
So either you find a way to work within it, or you build your own systems. Like rebelling is just another form of interacting with the system.
Hey, Troy Barnes believed in Christmas so he could take it down from the inside for the House of Jehovah. So, fans out there. One of my favourite raps ever.
Oh, right. Do we
Uh,
have a weekly win, Daniel?
We do have a weekly win. So we've got two, because one of them is a bit more author focused, and the other one is just a very, very happy hooray. So the first one is Emmy's mum's surgery went very, very well, and we're all very, very, very happy for Emmy and her mother. So like,
Yeah, we are.
Lord. And for anyone that did see any of the fundraising posts and stuff, I know it was sort of more quiet of her, but if you did fund and donate, then a massive thank you. And the second one is from Carla, who wrote a chapter of her steampunk novel for her little poet buddy, and they want her to do one more on the other side of the initial chapter for balance. So she's already found a hungry reader that is reading before it's even published. So that is awesome.
I love that so much.
Yeah. And just before we go into the question, just a very quick acknowledgement of the fact that the podcast last week, for some reason, didn't publish on the usual day of Monday. So apologies for anyone that was looking for that on the Monday. It is officially live. It went live yesterday, which will be Wednesday for people listening to this, and they should listen to the future and the whole time loop thing. But yeah, we're aware of the issue and it has been fixed. So
yes, and a big thank you to I'm trying to think of their handle. Was it Edwin?
Edwin.
Yes, a big thank you to Edwin for flagging that so we could sort it out.
Yes, perfect. Into the question.
Okie dokie. So the question this week is, what are tropes?
What is trope?
What is tropes?
How do book?
How do book? Why do tropes?
Why do tropes? Yeah, so like, as in case people haven't gathered yet, we're kind of like trying to cover a lot of the fundamentals of story writing, just for, because I think like there's a lot of terminology in writing that is needlessly complicated. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, like
in any industry, but yeah.
And it's all stuff that when you put them on the microscope and you look at them, you're like, that's what they are. And tropes are essentially familiar ideas, or building blocks that make particular stories.
Yep.
And so like me and Sam, in preparation for this, have put together a bunch of like tropes for different genres that we'll kind of go into in a minute. But like ultimately, knowing your tropes when it comes to writing your story means that you have more chance of writing a successful story. Because again, we covered this in an earlier episode, but like when you're writing a story, you don't have, or all right, let me rephrase this. If you're writing for fun and you just want to write whatever you want to, you're not worried about, publishing or like finding readers and all that kind of stuff. Like, write what you want. The scope of the world is yours. There are no limits. You are trying to become an activated author and you want to write books and put them out into the world. Like, you have to play within the systems, kind of like, what we were saying with the social media stuff. But like, there are expectations. There are things that a reader wants from certain types of books. And if you don't introduce that to them, although they might not necessarily understand why it's not working, they will feel shortchanged for the experience. So when we come into things like tropes, a simple trope, for example, just to get started, and I will speak from the point of horror because that is my baby. If you're writing a horror book that doesn't like in some way scare the audience in some way using particular things, so a very common trope in horror would be haunted house or an abandoned place. Like you'll see lots and lots and lots of those all over the shop in horror. That's just a thing people go to. And although we have a list of tropes, it's also worth mentioning that you don't have to shove everything into one. But what this gives you is a very, very good baseline, a very good outline on the parameters of what will make a successful story in that genre. Yeah. So if you can learn them, if you can understand like either all of them or a bunch of them, it really does give you a chance to go like, what kind of book shall I write? Okay, here's my menu of things on the table. I'm going to pick a little bit of found footage. I'm going to include some of the 70s in there. It's probably going to happen at nighttime, and I want to do it in a haunted house. Okay, so I've now got like 4 tropes for horror that will help me write a book. And from those things, I can then like add my characters, build the world, do all the other stuff. So tropes really are, as I say, they're building blocks of story, but they're also incredibly useful shortcuts to writing a story that will resonate with your readers. Yeah. Is there anything you want to add to that, Sam, before we go into?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, if you are like writing in a genre that you enjoy reading, which one would argue would be the smart move? Like, if you're not reading the genre you're writing, but then that's another episode. Then whether you know the names of them or not, I guarantee there's tropes in there because you are familiar with them as a reader. Like I've got a list of kind of names of fantasy tropes in front of me because I don't know really the names of any of them.
Yes.
But I use a lot of them. So for example, like missing, so in fantasy, like, you know, you misremember the past, or like you don't know the secret powers that you have inside you, the mentor that helps you like through all of the, you know, the checkpoints. Then you've got things like the chosen one. Dragons is a trope. Like, oh god, high fantasy, love a dragon.
Yeah. And this is the thing as well. Tropes can be like a whole range of stuff. They can be settings, they can be things, they can be like particular storylines. Like quest is a trope in
big one.
Yeah, but like dragons makes me laugh because it's just like, how do we make fantasy?
Dragons.
But it's right, like, other than, you know, you might get some sort of fantasy sci-fi, dragons mostly belong in fantasy, and that's where people find them. So and fantasy readers love a good dragon.
Oh my god, love a dragon.
So yeah, why don't we kind of break this down? Or actually, before we do that, I will also add, because what we have done here is made a very distinct note on the fact that like there are primary genre tropes, and then there are subgenre tropes. So I can't remember if we went into subgenres. I know we've done genres.
I don't think we haven't done an episode specifically on subgenres. I think we mentioned a few, but yeah, we haven't specifically done. No.
Yeah, so because subgenres can make a big difference, because obviously, like, so what we're talking about here is you have your umbrella genre. So for example, fantasy, and then underneath that you'll have like urban fantasy and
contemporary fantasy, traditional fantasy. Horror fantasy, historical fantasy, all sorts.
All the different types of fantasy. And each of those will have very, very specific things as well. So you have your umbrella tropes, which tend to relate to a lot of the stories. But then if you niche down, there will also be little sort of nuances and stories that you can take, or blocks you can take into that. So if you don't mind, I shall jump on first.
Please do.
So, okay, let's look at horror as a broad genre. So just some of the tropes in genre, because there can be hundreds for some
oh god, yeah, there are.
in most horrors there will be an abandoned or a haunted place. That could be like a haunted house that you're trapped in, or in the case of Stephen King's It, there is a particular haunted house that is sort of on the other end of town that features quite heavily in the story. Yes.
Or if we're looking at When Winter Comes by Daniel Willcocks, you could argue that the setting, the landscape itself, is kind of abandoned.
And there's an abandoned tunnel in there, so
there is an abandoned tunnel in there. Yeah, that's creepy as.
Another one is summoning evil. So there'll be people proactively playing with, you know, pentagrams and different books and rituals to try and bring some kind of evil into the world. So, you know, breaking that mirror into whatever other dimension that the horror lies within. Mentioned already, the 7 sins are very much used as themes. There's a lot of gluttony, a lot of lust, a lot of I'm trying to think what they were. Lust,
greed.
Gluttony, greed. But they feature very, very heavily because they're very Christianic indicative themes themselves. So using those and exploiting those for sort of repercussions and vengeance and things like that. Found footage in the case of things like the Blair Witch Project, which oh my god, like if you do found footage well, you do it very well. Like I saw a guy do a found footage clip on his Zoom with his friends during the pandemic, and it was genius. I don't know how they did it. I think I honestly don't know. But basically set them up as if they were like, oh, just a second, guys, I just need to go up into my loft, and they take their laptop with them, pop the laptop down so it's pointing up at the loft hatch, and then they climb up to the loft and you see the flash of like golden eyes, and then the next thing you know, he's just like taken. So found footage, if it seems real and like shaky and very amateur, that can add into horror. One of the very popular ones, splitting up or going solo. So if you're all in a group and you're somewhere, it's like, take this wing, you take this wing, like not like romantic breakups.
That's what I thought. I was like, the world is doomed.
Everything is done. No, it's that whole like when it's that thing in the horror movies where you're like, don't go by yourself.
What are you doing?
Why are you taking a shower in an abandoned house when you know that bad things are happening?
Why are you going up the stairs? Is the front door there? No, wrong way.
Another one, no communication. So often these horrors will happen in places where like cell phones break, or there's no radio service and they just cannot, like, it's all very isolated. Often bad things will happen at nighttime, and rarely there is a happy ending. It does happen sometimes, but rarely. That's kind of the broader overview of horror. And then I picked 3 subgenres just to kind of add a little bit extra to that. One of them, surprise surprise, will be cosmic horror. So cosmic horror is taken from sort of like the works of like Lovecraft, and it's all very big scale. So some of the tropes in cosmic horror are the unknowable monster, and kind of what that means is that oftentimes the bad guys in there aren't necessarily evil. So it's normally a case of, in the cosmic universal scope of things, these creatures, these massive monsters, are just living their life. They're not attacking you intentionally to harm you. It's just you're in their way of living. So it's not sort of malignant, is that the right word? There is often a highlighting of the insignificance of the human condition in the cosmic scheme of things. So the fact that like, we mean nothing really on this planet, like the universe is vast. There's presumptions of nature and biology are eroded. So it's about the disapproval of science we already know. So we think we know what's going on until something shows us to the contrary, just blows expectations. So in the case of Lovecraft's Mountain of Madness, they find an ancient civilization which predates any history that we know of. And so that kind of makes you go, well, what life are we living? What do we actually know? Cover your ears on this one. You're not going to like this one. Preoccupation with visceral materials. So often, like, monsters were made of things like gelatinous slime and tentacles and things that aren't generally of like human flesh and bone. And then I put like a couple of examples of stories. So like Mountains of Madness, you get Mountains of Madness by Lovecraft, Worm and His Kings by Haley Piper, and then Jordan Peele's Nope, I think, which is a film that came out last year, I think could be considered within this genre. So you can see they're a bit different. Like, you can stack those on top of the broader horror genre and then add these sort of nuances. 2 more quick subgenres. We've got folk horror. So typically you might have a modern protagonist who's plunged into a rural setting that has sort of more traditionally valued culture and life. So think of, like, I don't know, a lawyer in a city going to visit like an Amish community. Not necessarily that extreme, but that kind of feel.
Hot fuzz, but that's not horror, but like that idea.
Yeah, it's got that kind of like folk feel to it, because it's all very like urban.
You're great, you're good.
Rural even, yeah. The greater good. It's all cults and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, cults are big in folk horror. Sometimes you've got period pieces. So if movies like The Witch are very sort of period piece horrors that are quite folk and ritualistic. Were you laughing at period?
Oh, because just genuinely for a second, I was trying to keep a straight face, because I was like, I swear to God, like, the things that like men are afraid of. And then you're like, I was like, oh right, okay, you're talking about periods in time, not like menstruation. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Time periods. And then you got things like rituals, satanic monsters, paganism features a lot, sacrifice, superstition, and again, sort of this re-cementing of isolation. Couple of examples: The Witch, Midsummer, Blair Witch Project, all fantastic sort of folk horror inspired. Witches are very, very heavy in folk horror. I think just because it's that kind of very couple of centuries ago, like, mentality of what like science is, quite heavily. And the last one, just to top it all off, is paranormal horror, in which you get things like investigations, demons and monsters. There's normally an insidious underbelly of something going on, and you have like your ghosts and your hauntings within that as well. So just within horror itself, the main genre, 3 different subgenres, and a shite load of content that you can cherry pick for your story. Over to you, Sam, because I know you've got a few as well.
I do indeed. So I'm going to start with fantasy, because that's what I like. So like, if we're looking at fantasy as a whole, like main kind of tropes, there's so many freaking tropes. So I've got a list here, so I'm gonna read off it, otherwise my anxiety is a bit high today, so otherwise I'm going to fumble my words. Okay, so we've got things like The Chosen One. That's a huge trope in fantasy. Magical objects, so things like magical swords, like if you think like Arthurian legends, that kind of thing. Fairy tale retellings are huge. That's a big old trope. and then obviously magic. So things like elemental magic or kind of learned magic, just magic in general, magic systems, you know, dragons. I know I've said dragons and I know I've said dragons again, but people love a dragon. They love a dragon. Things like parallel worlds, secret royalty, huge like epic battles, massive like quests and journeys.
You don't think it's subtle fantasy. It's not.
Oh no, you don't.
In a tiny village.
No, you don't. That starts in a tiny village, and then it goes, wah! And then just things like, you know, the mentor or the like the wizard that kind of comes in and helps, that kind of thing. There's usually like a dark lord or an evil queen or some kind of huge, almost omnipresent threat to the world, like as a whole. So like, for example, you were talking about the different kind of threats in horror. Generally speaking, in fantasy, at least high fantasy, the threat is to the entire freaking world. Like, if you do not stop this thing, the world will either end, like completely end, or it will be reworked in the way that the Dark Lord, Evil Queen, omnipresent threat wishes it to be. So it'll either be actually properly ended, or the world as you know it, with goodness and light and frolicking and fairies, will end. And then if I'm going to look into some what's the word, subgenres, because fantasy has so many.
Yeah.
One of so I think a lot of the time when you think of fantasy, most people would like high fantasy is probably the first thing they think of, whether they know it as that or not. So things like Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, anything that is set in kind of like epic settings, usually like a lot of tropes in there. So like the quest, you know, like Lord of the Rings, you've got the One Ring, the Wheel of Time, they're trying to stop, at least in the first ones, like they're trying to stop the dragon being reborn and the world being remade and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, high fantasy, if we look at tropes in that, we have, like I say, quests. You've usually got a huge group of kind of adventurers, like a fellowship, for example, that go on that quest with you. It normally starts very small, so kind of the like little world to huge worlds. Then you've got like wizards, like I said before, and like magical creatures, magical species, so elves. I'm literally just listing Lord of the Rings now. Dwarves.
But although, because it's worth noting as well that Lord of the Rings isn't the originator, but it's one of the big populators of fantasy. So it makes sense that a lot of what is in Lord of the Rings is in pretty much most fantasies now. So like you say, dwarves and elves and wizards and all that kind of stuff. Like even like things like Ent and things have transferred over into other stories and stuff. So
yeah,
makes sense.
And then you have also, just quickly, so things like prophecies are in there. And definitely high fantasy is your Dark Lords and your Evil Queens, and like a huge kind of monster of some description is usually in there, whether that's like, for example, the Hobbit like has obviously Smaug. We all learned how to say that properly.
Smaug. It's
Smaug. I don't give a shit what you say. Smaug is ridiculous. Anyway,
what does Smaug say when he's got nothing to do?
I don't know.
Smorgasbord.
Thank you for that. And then so you also have amazing.
Oh, well, happy with that.
Well done. A couple of other kind of subgenres. So urban fantasy is huge at the moment, like has been for a little while. So urban fantasy, think of things like Twilight, or
the Dresden Files.
Yeah, or I'm like, for me, I'm not a big. Oh, I tell you what, the Rivers of London actually is a Ben Aronovich, is like a typical urban fantasy. And when
Faye Trask.
Yes, Blood Legacy. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the kind of like tropes within urban fantasy So you have kind of the detective trope.
That's cool.
So for example, you've said Faye now, and I'm thinking about Grimm, because she was talking about it in things earlier. So Grimm is an excellent example of this. It has the fairy tale retelling trope in it, and it has the detective trope in it. So he is a police officer that starts to see fairy tale creatures everywhere, but like the Grimm fairy tale versions, which is why it's called Grimm. And it's his job as a law enforcer, and now, you know, someone that can see into this secret world, which is another trope of urban fantasy, this kind of hidden world in plain sight that is kept from most people. So like this, you know, you travel through this almost secret doorway into this world. It's his job to kind of almost police that. That's a big trope. So Rivers of London is the same. He is a police officer, and he's part of a special, very small part of the police force, and his job is to, you know, keep these things in check. Learned magic is a huge trope in urban fantasy. So like in high fantasy, you get people that just kind of are intuitive with magic. You know, wizards, you don't really see them learning magic, generally speaking. It's, you know, people normally just have magic, where in urban fantasy, learned magic is like a big thing, because, you know, they like to reinvent the bloody wheel. So just all sorts of different kind of magic systems. To my chagrin, love triangles seem to be huge in urban fantasy. That's a very popular trope.
Yeah.
And then, you know, just things like, sorry, I'm just like fully annoyed that's one of them.
Toblerone of romance.
Yeah. Then just things like big on kind of brooding exceptions. So things like you know, the vampire that doesn't want to kill people.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult. I'm talking about Angel from Buffy here, but he's not the only one.
So it's worth noting as well that some of the tropes can transcend genres. So you have, like, you know, you've spoken about the Dark Lord, you've spoken about like quests and things. A lot of those, if you look at like the Lord of the Rings, if you look at Star Wars, there's similarities there in like the Mentor, in like, although, you know, you won't technically have magic in sci-fi, the Force, midi-chlorians. You still have, some of these can cross over into different ones as well. And it's also worth noting that, like, be very conscious of the wording of how the trope is, because one of the tropes in game lit / lit RPG is, which for people who haven't read it, is basically almost like you're playing a video game and your character is in a digital world playing a video game. And one of the big tropes in that is that there's no way back. So for example, you might have an elderly man or woman, 8 years of age, reaching the end of their life, and so they plug their consciousness to be immortalized in a video game. If you, and I've seen this done before, and the people not get the best reviews, if you make it so that person can come back, people don't like that. So this idea of almost having like game pods where you can like step in and then step out and all that kind of stuff aren't going to be received as well as the actual, you know, black and white trope of, no, they can't come back, they're in the game now. Like, it's different stakes if you don't go back into the mortal world. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So let's jump over into just a couple more. So like, I've got sci-fi here as a broader genre. Some of the tropes in sci-fi include things like space travel, time travel, alternate universes, robots, aliens, AI, nanotech, jarring futures, and results of technological corruption. So things so things like dystopian and post-apocalyptic fall within the sci-fi genre because they're often the result of scientifically explosive
So what you're telling me is sci-fi is more than just Star Trek and Star Wars?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
I don't like that.
No, I mean, when you think sci-fi, you think of like aliens, you think of spaceships and different planets and things, but
You think of Jean-Luc Picard saying on screen.
yeah, I mean, technically sometimes in charts horror is nestled under sci-fi and fantasy because you've got elements of, you know, genetic corruption, like, and it's that thing where they can kind of play, it gets very complicated. But just a couple of like differences in the tropes of sci-fi. If you are using the space opera subgenre, you get things like obviously space exploration that doubles up from the original primary genre. There's often a focus on militarization and wars.
Yes.
You still have your quests. There's often sometimes the romantic element of that, of like, you know, these sort of Romeo and Juliet factions. And yeah, an example of space opera was, you know, Star Wars can be considered a space opera because of the breadth of it and how like big it is. You've got the wars and the different planets.
There's definitely the quest in there, the romance, the
incestuous romance.
Yeah, I don't know if you can't consider it incestuous if the second they realize they're brother and sister, they're like, I think it's more like they don't know they're brother and sister when they kiss.
So what I'm hearing is incest is with intention.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, like, you could, who knew it was taking this turn, but like, you could just pause for a really long time. I'll cut that out for listeners. But like, they don't know their brother and sister, and it's one kiss, and they find out, and then they're like, I'm good, let's not. If they'd have been like, I'm good, let's, then that's definitely incest. And I also think that, like, maybe if they didn't know but it went on for a really long time, you would still class it as incest. I think a one-off kiss where you don't know, like, is that a freebie? I don't know. So that's some of the tropes of the incest genre.
Yeah, get in the comments. Let us know if what your opinions on incest are.
Please don't. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of that one comment.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is going on the internet.
Yeah.
So yeah, ignore that. One final subgenre within sci-fi particularly is post-apocalyptic. So I'll pick this one out just because, again, like, it's very different to space opera, but it's often quite strongly linked to the sci-fi genre. So
yeah,
post-apoc, you get your cataclysmic scientific catalysts. So the reason the world has ended is like a scientific virus, it's an electromagnetic pulse, sometimes it's global warming, could be nuclear bombs, whatever it is, like, humans done fucked up.
Which is an excellent trope.
Yep. Desolate planets, you have your lonely protagonists, you have bandits and warring factions. There's often a quest for a cure or solution somewhere in there. An example of that being like The Last of Us or The Road by Cormac McCarthy. So yeah, broadly, like, there's a whole scope of things, but hopefully with a lot of those examples we've highlighted the difference between like the broader genre, which like
I've just realized that I forgot one of the biggest tropes in high fantasy, which is the moment that Aragorn walks through the double doors.
Yes. That needs to be every.
That is its own fucking trope.
Yeah, so yeah, hopefully we've highlighted the difference between like knowing the broader genre tropes and subgenres particularly. But as we say, like, tropes on their surface, they're incredibly simple. It's just the word tropes, I think, sometimes throws people off, but it is just the building blocks of what makes that particular story. And you have a whole buffet to play with. Like, we've read but a morsel of what is on the buffet. Yeah. So try and over to you.
I was just gonna say the list is like extensive, and what we've spoken about is like far from exhaustive. Is that how you say it? It's not. Yeah. And like, you might hear tropes being described as cliche sometimes as well.
Yeah. And I'm really like developing a problem with the word cliche these days.
Yeah, and it's you know, cliches are cliches because they're used a lot to, you know, greater or lesser effect.
I feel like cliches are the gravy that goes on the imposter syndrome mash.
I want gravy and mash now. I probably want gravy and mash. Yeah, but no. Also, I think sometimes people are like, it's cliche, or they roll their eyes at certain tropes because it's been done a certain way. Yes. But just because, like, some like love triangles and vampires and werewolves, for example, just picking that completely randomly, not referring to anything in particular, people get, you know, bored of that or sick of that, and they're like, ugh, it's been done to death. But it hasn't. It's just
for you, mate.
It's been done that way for that person to death. It's same as anything else. Take what you enjoy and use that going forward, I would say, if that
One of my
makes
least
any
favourite.
sense whatsoever.
One of my least favorite like cliches, and this is a cliche, is the villain turnaround of well. Like just
We are the same, you and I.
yes, well. But yeah, so there it is. There are hundreds upon thousands of different tropes. So build your story accordingly, and play with them, have fun with them. Like that's the whole point of these kind of tropes, and what we're really trying to drill with some of these conversations that we're having is that like the frameworks are there for you to play in and to have fun. Like if there were no barriers, no borders, like there would be no way that you could write a story that would please mass audiences. So like there's a reason people have come to expect these, because they like them and because they work. And that doesn't also mean that new tropes aren't born all the time and that people do push the boundaries. But if you're earlier in your writing, like learn to play within these before you then start to experiment.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to like understand the rules before you break them, because broken rules on accident generally just feel like mistakes, where broken rules on purpose is genius. So like learn the rules first before you start to kind of like mess with them a bit.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll put some links into the show notes for places where you could start to find out some more tropes and bits and pieces. I am planning on writing some articles and things for Activated Authors about tropes and a bunch of different things to help authors with their writing. So keep a watch out for those. But yeah, that brings us sort of towards the end. So just a reminder for people that on our website is a whole host of free stuff now. So one of the things that we're offering at the minute is if you would like a 30-minute free coaching call with myself, you can book those. No obligation, no charge, absolutely nothing. Just literally go over to activatedauthors.com, scroll down on the page, and there you can book a free 30-minute coaching call with myself if you want to have any questions very quickly answered. Just find out a little bit more about what we're doing, whatever it is you want to talk about. It's there for you to book in. So jump on over to activatedauthors.com for that. And we will say, finally, a massive thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in. We appreciate you and the time you choose to spend with us each and every week. And if you're interested in finding out all about how to level up your writing and activate your author career, head on over to https://www.activatedauthors.com.
Or you could just type in activatedauthors.com because you don't need to put any of that shit in anymore.
And you can find out all about our community, our resources, and everything else we've got going on. One more time from myself and from Sam. We will see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Activate your energy.